All right, so in this demonstration, we're going to move forward and we're going to start applying some background colors to things so that we can see the space that they occupy and move them around on the page. And we'll also be talking a little bit about the box model. First, I want to show you a couple of different ways you can use brackets to write rules. First of all, you can use brackets the way that we've been doing, which is you can start typing and use the tooltip, right, where it does auto hinting. Okay, so for instance, if we wanted to create another rule, let's say for instance that we wanted to come down here and create a rule under article so that we can tell the article what color to be. And if you remember, we had talked about making them, if you look at the example, making this sort of this green color, right? Let me close this out. Okay, well, if you want to do that, let's look real quickly at what we have. This is currently what we've got, and we want to be able to make each article its own separate color. All right, so if we come back over here under the article styling area, because that's what we're going to be styling as an article, we would have to tell it that we want to make a rule for an article, and it's just going to be a generic article. So in CSS, remember, you would just write the tag or the element name without any kind of other hashtags or dots or anything like that, so that it targets every instance of an article. It would target this one, it would target this one, down below, and so on. Okay. Now, the other thing that we could do to be more specific is that we could tell it that we only want it to apply to any content article, because if you'll remember, there's also up here inside of the banner, there's also an article up there, and we don't want that to be green. So what we'd want, if we want specificity, is we would say section pound, and then this was called content. We can double check. You can see here it's called content. Content, and then we put a space because this indicates that the article is going to be inside of the section whose ID is content, right? So this would be the section whose ID is content, and then any descendants or children of that would be targeted that had the tag name of article. And that is actually a thing, it's just not some goofy thing I made up. There are parent-child relationships, and they're also referred to as descendant and ancestors, because a descendant, if a child isn't a direct child of a parent, then it is a descendant of its ancestor somewhere, okay? And so in this case, article is a child of section whose ID is content, okay? So that's the way that this is written, and this is referred to, you can call it a compound selector, but it's also specifically this part having the space means that it is a nested selector. So it's a compound nested selector. This part is compound because it is specifying which specific section, because it's the section whose ID is content, and then this is the article that is a child or a descendant of the section whose ID is content. Okay, so anyway, we can just start typing like this. We could say background, and it'll start to code hint for us. And then what we could do now is we could go and pick from, let's just click here. We can go and pick from our color palette, and let's say that we want this really bright green, okay? And I can put my hashtag there and save this. That is one way that we could write the rule. And let's actually, let me pull this over, and then we can do this a little bit more efficiently here. And you can see that it updated it for us, and it's got this really bright green, okay? And you might look at this and say, wait, this doesn't look anything at all like that other one where, you know, it's sort of a muted, more or less saturated, more muted green. Well, one of the things that you'll notice about this, and we'll get to this in just a few minutes, is that these two things actually have background images that are semi-transparent, and because they have a little bit of a black shade to them, like a slightly opaque, not completely opaque, but slightly opaque dark color, then it is actually going to end up muting this really, really bright color, okay? Just so you know. Okay, so that's one way that we could have written the article. I want to cut this out though, and it's still on my clipboard. I want to cut it out, but I want to show you another way that you can also do it using brackets. You can't do this with every code editor, but because we're using brackets, I'm going to show you how you can with brackets. Over in the HTML, let's say that I said, all right, this is an article and I want to be able to write a rule just by clicking this and it'll know what to do in the CSS. Well, you can actually do that. So let's try it. I'm going to right click this and say quick edit. And it tells me that there's no existing rule for article, which we haven't done over here because remember I cut it out. I can say new rule. And you see what it does is it's not, just so you're, I don't want you to be confused, it's not actually putting this inside of the HTML. What it's doing is it's showing you in the CSS where it's placing it. If I were to scroll down here, you see that it created a new rule for me at the very bottom of my document. And so if I wanted to start writing a rule, I could do that. I could say background, and then let's pick that color again, because I don't remember what it was. Let's copy this. I can come back over here. Background is that green color. And you can see that it's showing up over here in the CSS, right? And then the other thing too is it's not necessarily going to be smart enough to know that you want to also tell it that it's the article inside of the section whose ID is content. So you'd have to type that here as well, like we did before. And you'd put a space there so that we know that this is the descendant of the content section, okay? And then if I close this, it closes it back up, and you can see that it's over here now in the style sheet. Now the only thing that you would need to do if you want to keep your style sheet nice and clean is you need to copy this, actually you need to cut it, and you'd move it to the correct place, because it will put it at the bottom. You can't really tell it exactly where you want it to go, unfortunately. At least I haven't found out a way to do that. Now something else that I haven't really mentioned that you can do is if you want to be able to see your sections of your document very, very clearly, you notice all these little drop down items. Well, if you have things that are nested within other things, you're going to end up getting a drop down item. So let's say that we wanted to collapse all the major sections. Well, this is a section. Remember, it's the banner, and this is the content, right? And then this is the footer. And so you can see right here that we've got three main sections. We have section banner, section content, and then the footer, right? But if you wanted to see, for instance, like only what was inside of the content area so that you don't have the page littered with stuff, you could do it this way. And then if you wanted to see like, okay, how many articles do we have in there? You could collapse it like that, right? And you could see article about, article goals, article miss, right? And so this is one way for you to very easily just take peeks at things and maybe only the stuff that you're currently working on. You can also do that in the CSS as well. So if you don't want to have to see all of the rules, you can collapse stuff and only look at it as you deem it necessary. Okay, so now that we've discussed those things, let's just go ahead and start making some rules. I'm just going to type them. I'm not going to use this because then I'd have to move them around constantly. So I'll just come down here and I'll begin something new for the footer. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this background for the banner because I want those two things to match, if you remember from the example. I'm going to save this and I'm going to save this, even though I still have my live edit. I still like to save things periodically. And you can see that now my footer is the same color as the background. Now something that you're going to notice is that I never told any of these things to have any margins. See how this is sitting off the edge of the viewport? By the way, this whole thing, right, it's called the viewport. And all these things, they're not going all the way to the edge of the viewport. That is because of the default browser styling. In addition, we're also getting default browser styling showing up with these gaps here as well. And we'll go over that in a little bit, but right now let's just at least get this stuff so that it's not sitting off the edge of the viewport. What happens is that these things are all enclosed in the body tag, and the body by default has a margin of approximately 10 pixels all the way around, and so it pushes it off of the edge of the viewport. Let's do something. Let's go to the very top of our CSS document, and one of the things that I'm going to go ahead and do as part of the body is I'm going to tab in and I'm going to set it so that it has a margin of 0. And whenever you type 0 as a unit of measure, you don't have to put the unit of measure next to it. Like you don't have to put 0px for pixels or 0em for m, because 0 is 0, period. And so I'm going to say margin 0. And then if we come back over here and take a peek, you can see that now it goes all the way to the edge. And what that did was it overrode the browser style sheet margin that's being applied. All right, so we're telling it explicitly, no, we want it to be a 0 margin, so it goes all the way to the edge. Something that I want to show you to help you understand a little bit about the box model is the Google Chrome Inspector. Now, I think I mentioned this in the previous assignment. If you were to use this live edit Google preview, that's the brackets live edit, then to get the inspector, if I right click and say inspect, the only problem is that it's going to end up putting a lot of information that says data brackets ID equals whatever. This stuff isn't actually in our regular code view, so it might be confusing to you. It's really kind of up to you if you want to play around with this, or if you want to look at a different page that is the saved version that doesn't have all of this nonsense. I think that it, for the sake of making it simpler for you to understand what's happening, I think I'm going to go ahead and close the live preview. We can always do it again later. And I'm going to open a new version. And if I come over to my file system and I go inside of my assignment 2 folder, which is my root project folder for this assignment, and I just double click the index.html file. As long as Google is your default browser, it'll open in Google Chrome. Otherwise, you would need to right click it and say open with, and you'd have to find the correct application for Google Chrome. And you'll notice that up here in the address bar, it doesn't say 127.0.0.1. What that is, that 127.0.0.1, without going into a lot of explanation, is it's like a little mini server that comes with brackets. It sort of behaves like a little server that provides a live service, a live web service that allows you to constantly see the updates that you're doing. This is different because it's using a protocol. This is the scheme right here. Anything before the forward slashes is called the scheme. It's using a scheme protocol that is based on just the real file system. So this is pulling up the last saved version of this file. Now, as long as that's what you're using to look at your file, if you were to right click in Google Chrome and say inspect, then you end up getting the header without it saying, data dash brackets dash ID equals something, right? This is rendering out the HTML, and you'll notice as I hover over different elements in this HTML that all these different colors are flashing over here on the left. If I open this up a little bit more, and then I'm going to open this panel up more, yours might, by the way, it might have opened down below. If so, that's fine. I typically like to look at mine up on the right side, and to change the docking, you just click these little 3 buttons and change where the dock is supposed to go. So I want to show you just really quickly a little bit about this idea of a box model. So if I were to select any of this HTML on the right side, so let's select this article, you can see what happens is as I hover over it, it shows blue. Okay, and if you look down below here, blue is the actual element itself. It's the tag, and it tells you what the currently rendered size is down here. So if I were to open this up a little bit more, you see that the size changes because it is based on the size of the viewport of the body. You might also notice that margin is still there around the body. If I click on the body, you see it shows me in orange, because orange is the margin, it shows me that there's still a margin. That tells me, since this isn't the live preview, this is actually the saved file, it tells me that I haven't saved that file. And if I click over here, you see how there's a dot up here? That means that the file is not saved. If I save this, let's make sure index is saved. Yep. If I save that and then I jump back over and I refresh the page, you can see that it did update, and now the body has no margin.